You're listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. With the help of successful individuals across industries, Dirk breaks down the unknown parts of every vocation while highlighting the importance of finding a career where you can leverage your natural skills, passions, and interests. Now here's your host, Dirk Nevelle.
Hello, everyone. This is Dirk Nevelle. On with me is a friend, Reid Kuether. Reid, welcome.
Thanks, Dirk. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Reid, I have not had anybody in the physical therapy industry or world yet. So I'm excited because, back in the day when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, this was one of the things I thought about. So Reid is a friend of mine I've known for years, a client, mutual friends. And, a lot of the people I know in my community actually go to Reid for help. So he is legit. He is very good at what he does. And why don't you kind of, in your own words, explain what you do, how long you've been in it, how you got into it, and we'll kind of just take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm the owner of Phoenix Physical Therapy and Personal Wellness. I've opened this practice about 8 years ago now. Prior to that was the clinic director and founding therapist of the Proliant Surgeons Group up in the Highlands here in Issaquah. And prior to that, worked for a couple different national companies as a clinic director, fairly soon out of PT school. My first job was at a clinic in Kirkland that was affiliated with the Seahawks athletic trainer at the time, which was a really cool place to learn kind of high-end athletic stuff. Just kind of morphed my career more into management and still do 40 hours of clinical care at the same time. So kind of got into the profession when I was in high school. I think like everybody, there's some sort of pivotal moment where you're exposed to something. And my twin sister tore her ACL her senior year of basketball and had to do physical therapy first to play before she had surgery. And her therapist, frankly, was not that motivating. So she asked me to go into her session one time and just kind of try to get her to pass this it was a KinCom test at the time, but kind of an old way that we used to test people's strength, and, just stood there and tried to motivate her instead of her therapist who was over there drinking a cup of coffee in the corner. And she ended up passing to go back and play that last bit of her senior year and kind of had that ability to return, right? So I think we're both exposed to the profession at the same time, kind of in that really important, critical period, right? And so we're both physical therapists, as it turns out. She's gone more into academia. She's a professor with Central Michigan's program, and I continue to do more of the professional side. So, and now kind of balance that business owner therapist hat at the same time.
I love it. So interesting. Was the why then you saw a situation where maybe the person in recovery mode wasn't getting taken care of the way they should be, and you're like, you know what, I want to fix that, or I want to be the answer to that?
Yep. I thought I could do it better, at least do it better than what she experienced. And then when you start looking into the profession, if you want to work in Wyoming with dancers, you can. If you want to work in Seattle with athletes or New York City with dancers, there's just so much opportunity geographically, and then the demographics of the patient that you work with. It was just really enticing to have that mix of opportunity. So
you were locked in at an early age.
I was, yeah. Senior year, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I went right to it, right?
I love it, because a lot of folks don't, and I'm 53 and I've had a couple career changes, and sometimes it takes years of experience, but for you, it sounds like it happened early. So I know you went to, was it University of Puget Sound for your master's?
Yep.
And then prior to that, what was your college?
Went to Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan for my undergrad, which is in biopsychology. Okay. Which I think is critical if you're going to work with people, to have some sort of a psychology background. So it was a nice degree to kind of mix in the biologies and the psychologies together. So I
love it. Yeah. I actually went back to psychology school after technology, which is another story, but I think psychology plays a part in everything. So I'm curious, the reason I asked that is, so if someone's interested in, is PT the way, kind of the jargon, the acronym that people, okay. So is that something you can knock out in your undergrad, or do you have to go get a master's?
Well, now it's a doctorate. So I'm kind of old school, sitting with my master's still. So now all programs have switched over to a doctorate program. And so there are some schools that'll fast track, like you can take your undergrad for the first 3 years, and there's a transition year where you're still taking undergrad courses, but you're in your first year of PT school. Most folks are going to go through a 4-year degree program and then apply to PT school, which is a 3-year program. Most schools it's year round for those 3 years. Some schools still have the summers off, but you do come out with a doctorate now. So, but it's 7 years is kind of the track for most people.
So 7, is that based off of taking the right classes in your 4-year undergrad? Or can you, let's just say you were economics and then you're like, oh, I want to go to PT school. Can you get it done in 3 years, or do you have to extend that?
Yeah, if you have a degree in something, you just have to go back and get those prerequisites that you may have missed. So to your point, in my PT class, there were 30 of us, and we had one woman who was a music major and decided that she really wanted to go into PT. So she had to backtrack and get some of the sciences that she didn't get in her undergrad. But yeah, you certainly can. And there's just, a handful of things like chemistry, biology, physics, statistics, probably for her, that you're going to normally take through some of those kind of pre-med type coursework on your way to PT for most people. But
so, you're talking a lot about different skill sets, and I've had experience with injuries, and so I know I'm going to probably not say this the right way, but you have to know the body, of course. You have to know people. There's probably a lot of things you have to have in your arsenal to be good at what you do. What are like 3 or 4 of the most important? Like, is it the obvious of just knowing how the body works?
Yeah, and I think there's even, you can dive deeper into that answer. For my profession, I'm in orthopedics. So I work with, athletes, people that just want to walk better, lift their grandkids, and then up to the professional athlete level. So for my job, it is definitely an understanding anatomy and physiology, kind of the function biomechanics of the body. I always say, it's just like you bring your car to the mechanic. We are the body mechanic in terms of watching somebody walk or, kind of troubleshoot when they present for their initial evaluation. Like, why are they having the pain pattern that they're having? It's easy when somebody's had surgery, let's say rotator cuff repair, and you're like, oh, okay, well, we know what we need to do there, right? But when somebody has that nondescript kind of no rigid mechanism of injury, just kind of this gradual onset of pain, you're really trying to problem solve what isn't working well in the system. So I took a adaptive leadership program, and one of the tenets of that program was your system is designed to give you the results that you're getting. So that transfers into my job. When somebody comes in and they're limping and they have back pain, it may be because their big toe doesn't flex enough, right? Because now they're limping and they're doing a different strategy up top. We're going to treat the back pain, but really the cause might be the toe mobility, right? So we've got to figure that out and not just treat those symptoms.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a personal injury I have in my hip, and somebody thought it was my left toe, which we can talk about offline, but it's interesting. So how often are you getting challenged by other medical professionals? Or are you the boss? When you say, this is what I think the issue is, do you find yourself, well, hey, my doctor said this, or do you feel like you're the authority on these issues?
I think physical therapists are starting to become more of an awareness over the first step. Like, we get a lot of patients now that haven't seen physicians prior to coming in to see us. Direct access has been kind of opened up in a lot of insurance plans for that, which is great to not to, miss the step of having to go for someone to just say, yeah, you have knee pain, go and see physical therapy, right? And it works both ways. We would want to refer somebody back if it was something out of our scope. So to have that differential diagnosis skill set is super important. I think I've been doing it for so long here in ISQUAD. This is my 25th year now, that I've got a pretty good relationship with physicians where they just kind of say, Reid's going to figure that out. Right. And so they have that trust in that evaluative process that I put people under when they first come in. But there are times where I might disagree with a physician's diagnosis. Then it's a phone call or a conversation via a fax note with my evaluation and the critical pieces of that data to say, hey, this isn't really adding up to X, whatever the diagnosis was, but I think I'm going to go down this road and see what we can do. And physicians, for the most part, really trust us. I think they get 15 minutes with their patients. Sometimes we're spending a full hour doing a full evaluation, watching people walk. There's a lot of times folks go back to their doctor, say it's after foot surgery, and the surgeon doesn't actually watch the patient walk. So, the surgery may be healing great, but functionally that person may not be putting that joint through the right paces. So I think we do get a lot of trust. I think we have to trust ourselves too. Like, there's cluster signs and symptoms that we follow when it comes to an algorithm, how to evaluate somebody. And again, having the more data points, we come out of school and we have entry-level skills, right? We're safe with patients. We know how to not cause harm. But when you see more and more people with the same presentations and start understanding either bell curves of presentations or sharp linear lines of this is what this looks like, right? And not to always say that this is the one thing, again, back to the psychology part, is whenever you're dealing with a human system, everybody's different. I can line 5 patients up that come in with plantar fasciitis as a diagnosis. I'm going to treat every one of those people a little bit differently, right? They may have different needs. It could be a really rigid foot that's causing that, or it could be a really flexible foot that's causing that. And I've got to figure out the bottom line of where the root is, right?
I love it. Yeah, one of my questions is I want to get more into the career, but what makes you good at what you do? Like, maybe in lending, people come to me because 2 or 3 reasons. What is it about Reid you think that helps bring in the referrals? And we're all unique. We all have our own skill sets, our own genuine, like what we're better at than other people. In your industry, what makes you who you are?
It's always hard to toot your own horn, right? But I think the classic theme from patients when they've been elsewhere, or they get sent into me because they're failing at their current location, number one, they feel like I put them through the most thorough eval that they've ever been under, that I first spend a lot of time listening to what they have to say and what they're experiencing. And then I do a really thorough, like when somebody comes in to see me, say for orthotics, I always joke, I'm going to get to your foot at some point, but I'm starting from the low back down. And we're going to put them through a complete biomechanical evaluation from that whole lower chain to see what, if there's a hip restriction, that it may be that orthotics aren't the answer, right? So I think they feel like they really are heard, they're really seen, and there's this thoroughness to the time that we spend together to put together a big plan. And then I think my second tenet that I really I feel proud of is my ability to educate people. And I mean, I'm full of analogies, right? If somebody's more of a technical person, I'm going to use technical analogies. If somebody's more artistic, let's use artistic analogies, right? There's so many different ways for patients to understand. If they know why I'm asking them to do a certain exercise, they're much more willing to do it and be compliant if they understand the why, right? Simon said it, start with your why. And I think patient education is just the root to that.
Yeah, I remember when I blew out my ACL and I worked with John over at Xanis, I believe. Yep. He's gone, but he's not competitive. So go to Reid. He's moved away. But I was very vulnerable. Like I was scared in a way. I was nervous about what the future was going to be. That must be like kind of where psychology kicks in, and you have to kind of reach these patients where they are and kind of get them through, but I remember I struggled a lot, and PT was hard for me. But I got through it, and what I guess I'm getting at is if you're thinking and watching Reid right now and you're thinking about this, it's more than just, black and white working on the body. It's an emotional connection that you need to be able to establish with your patients, I would assume.
100%. If they don't trust you, first of all, to be their advocate and to have their best interest in mind, right? Like I'll run over with a patient visit if we're really struggling on something, or, there's just this piece that I know you can get if you just do 2 more reps. Like, I'm not like, oh, my next patient's here, I'm going to bounce out, right? Like every person that comes in here that has my time for 45 minutes for follow-ups, it's valuable and it's attuned care, right? And I think, the emotion part of it, I don't think in all the 25 years I've practiced, I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone say after a total knee replacement. And I think 99% of my patients after total knees, at some point, usually within the first 2 weeks, there will be tears in PT, not because they're in pain, but because there's this emotional, like, I didn't realize what I was signing up for. Their first 2 weeks are the hardest, and they don't see themselves out of that fog to understand this is going to get better, right? And it's tough, and it's unrelenting in those first 2 weeks. And man, woman, it doesn't matter across the demographic of age, athlete, non-athlete, prior trauma to the knee or not. There's going to be some tears, and I'm expecting it at this point, not that I'm trying to cause it by any means, but when it comes out, I feel like there's this big release and we get to move forward from it, right? But, everyone's like, I'm sorry. Well, no, I mean, the apology, this was part of the rehab process, right? Yeah. I always say if I were to write a book, it'd be called Not Just Physical Therapy, because I think sometimes you're there just to listen, and it might be something that's going on in their, kids' lives or, marital problems or whatnot, but you're there to listen. As trauma is released from the body, so is emotion, and they come together. Right. And the fear, you don't know. I know what's going to happen to that person in 3 months, right? I know the end game where we're going to get, but they don't see it in those first 2 weeks. So there is a big vulnerability.
Yeah, no, it's powerful. I mean, it's just more than, hey, let's get you back. It's kind of the whole trauma, atrophy is such an interesting thing to go through. And it's almost, I think you made a comment about analogies or metaphors you use or something a lot in your practice, but like when you see like your leg shrink, and then get built back up, that's kind of like the soul or the heart, not to get too deep, but anyway, so 25 years, what has surprised you? I mean, I know you're very intelligent and you knew what you're getting yourself into, but what didn't you expect? What threw you, if anything? Is there one or two things you're like, man, I didn't see this coming?
I think from a practice standpoint, I would say insurance can be a bit of a challenge, right? The insurance companies are charging subscribers more, paying providers less, right? So, my costs continue to increase with, salary increases, rent increases, and your reimbursement rate is not necessarily equitable in that, right? So that's been an interesting thing. I think, we are in a kind of a unique bubble here in the Pacific Northwest when it comes to insurance restrictions. There are definitely pockets of the country that have it much worse than we do here. But it sometimes can be a battle, right? When an insurance company gives me 6 visits at a time for somebody who's a post-op athlete, that's not going to be done in 6 weeks, and you have to continue to work on getting more and more authorization. You're spending so much time grinding wheels that you shouldn't have to grind, that it can be really frustrating, right? And I think I can speak for anybody in any industry, but COVID certainly was not something on anybody's radar, right? And managing through that as an essential service, right? We had people that would definitely have declined if we weren't available for care, and putting yourself in that position where we're going to put ourselves in the front lines, right? We're going to protect ourselves as best we can. We're going to do the things in the clinic that we can to keep everybody safe. And I think it was nicer to be a bit of a smaller practice. We didn't have 50 people in the room together, right? But that was a challenge to figure out how to do it the right way. As did everybody. There was no manual that was available. We were writing it as we were going along. But that was a biggie in terms of the business side of things.
Yeah, let me just make sure I'm following you, but I really want to make sure. Is it the aligning of the recipe of success with what an insurance carrier is willing to do? Is that kind of the core? Like, my patient needs 20 visits for the next 4 months. They're only going to reimburse him or her for half of that. Is that the issue that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I think, some companies have gone to a third party that looks at the chart notes and looks at, really they're looking at a self-report functional scale to say whether or not somebody should have more visits. And when you're working, let's say I currently have an athlete who has got some pretty good patellar tendonitis, basketball player in college, and we're trying really hard to work on his mobility in his ankle is really the driver of his patellar tendonitis. He can't squat deep enough. When he goes to do a jump, he's loading up his patellar tendon way too much because the ankle doesn't dorsiflex. So I've got to work on that to get his patellar tendon down, right? So it's these steps that have to happen. It's not just isolated patellar tendonitis. It's these other things that have to happen for that patellar to be under less load. And I can't always do that in 6 visits. Right. So then they say no. So you do a peer-to-peer review and you think that you've got the person on the other end of the phone is saying, yeah, I totally appreciate this, Reid. I see where you're going. I really think this is good. And then you don't get what you thought you were going to get from that phone call either. And so you're trying to be an advocate for the patient, but it's taking so much more time away from actually treating patients that there's this, negative result because, we need to stay productive to keep the money coming in the door. Right. So, you take a patient visit slot and do a phone call to try to get more visits for somebody. It's just a net zero. And I'll do it all the time because I think patients need that care, and our job too is to get patients to be independent. So there is this balance. And I think people have probably over abused the, let's just see you for 18 months, right? Well, that's not good either. I mean, our job is to get people to be independent once they can do the things in the gym, but our hands-on skill set, if that's still valuable for that patient, I think we should be able to treat them. So we're just kind of working harder to get less dollars really, sadly, when it comes to the insurance reimbursement side of things, but.
So I know it varies, you have a variety of types of clients, but is the relationship, like in my world, I might do a loan for somebody and never see him again, right? Or I might help them 10 times in 5 years, who knows? Sure. In your world, is it if you were to average it out, is it a 6-month relationship you have with somebody and maybe they never come back, or, it's probably not every year, right? Because eventually the benefits run out. How long is the relationship? Like, how long is program the right phrase?
Yeah. Kind of, I think, our treatment plans for most folks are going to probably run 4 to 6 weeks for just, non-trauma, non-surgical stuff. Surgeries, we might see somebody for a good 3 to 4 months, because there's some protocols, let's say again, rotator cuff repair, you don't do any strengthening until 8 weeks into the series of of treatment, right? You're working on range of motion in the beginning, and there's this segmental kind of recipe book for how we get people going forward. So you can't do things that they need to do until a certain time frame, right? So I would say on average, I probably see people between that kind of 6 to 8 weeks, and then there's probably that 3-month mark. There's kind of those two kind of averages. And, I might see some patients multiple times a year, and people start to break down, one joint goes and another joint might go, and you're seeing people for, bilateral total knee replacements, maybe on the polar ends of a calendar year. Or, they might cycle through again a year or two later, right? So there are some definitely that you'll see and you wonder how they are because you just don't ever see them again. And that's great. And I always say my job is to get you to fire me, right? I want you to be done with what I'm doing for you so that you can do this and you're doing what you need to do on your own. And then there's just people that come back and we joke, it's okay if you come back as long as it's for something different, right? You want to get that primary diagnosis controlled and healed, whatever that means, right? At least functional for them to go back to doing what they want to do. And then, when people start to trust you, this is, networking is so important you'll see the same people or family members or friends of family. Right now, I think I have 6 members of one family all on my schedule for multiple different reasons, right? But you got to go and see Reid is kind of the topic at their dinner table, right? So
yeah, I bumped into I told you, a buddy of mine had a ski accident, and you're helping him. So so if you're listening to Reid and you're thinking, okay, this sounds pretty cool. I've always thought this is what I want to do. My assumption is you could be really, really good at what you do, but if you don't have the at-bats or the referral networks or the people coming in, you're going to starve. Right. So I guess the question I have, is it just really a matter of getting really good at what you do, having happy clients talking about you? Are you working with specific types of doctors? Like, what's the recipe for success for spreading the good word of Reid? Like, how do you create this referral network that doesn't end?
Yeah, I think it does start with our physicians. I think if you've got a good relationship, or physicians see when they send patients to you, the outcomes are always good, patients are always happy. I think, and that has to both happen, right? You can have a great outcome, but the patient's like, yeah, it was terrible to be there, right? But you want to create this environment where patients want to be here. And sometimes it's actually hard for me to kick people out when they're done, because they're like, well, no, I need to keep coming twice a week. It's like, well, that's fun, but I can't keep charging your insurance company for that, right? So when patients go back to their physicians and say, I had such a great time there, the atmosphere is great, look at what I can do with my shoulder, and they kind of brag about their response, that's golden, right? I do think, social media is always great. I think Nextdoor has created a whole different host of ways for people to come and see you. There's plenty of people going on, hey, I've got to have a shoulder rehab. Where should I go? And, I've had plenty of patients say, well, I found you on Nextdoor, because everybody kept saying, Phoenix. And then you just I think you have to be a part of your community, right? Like we still live in small communities, even though they're big cities, but Issaquah still has such a small town feel to me, and it expands out to Snoqualmie and to North Bend and, Falls City. And if you have that kind of reputation within the community, I think that's where you start to just get people to feed in to, I've always wanted people, when they think physical therapy, I want them to think Reid, right? And more so, I want them to think Phoenix, because I think the staff that I have here is just as valuable as I am in terms of the quality of care and the level of attunement that we provide at services. They're going to get that whether they see me or my colleagues.
Yeah, let's talk about that. We were kind of discussing it earlier before I hit record, but when I've had a lot of guests on my podcast who are, like I have an artist who's very creative, and he's also a businessman, where he has to go out and get involved with the P&L and recruiting and all that. So for you, if you're watching Reid, you practice, you're like working with people, but you also run the business. So how does that work? Do you find yourself like too much business stuff going on and not enough? How do you balance it?
Oh, the work-life balance.
It's the work balance. I guess what I'm saying is the dance between running Phoenix and then when you get a practice, because you have to hire, recruit, you probably have to fire, you probably have to run a P&L. So then, those are different skill sets than PT school, right?
Sure. Yeah. I don't think they teach us enough in PT school to be private practice owners, although I think that's what our profession would like us to do. So there's a missing piece there. I did have the benefit of, like I said, I worked for 2 nationwide companies as a clinic director. So I did go to Dallas with one company for their management training. And then I went to Memphis for another management training session with the other company. And then running with ProLiance, they gave me a lot of freedom there in terms of, I had somebody doing the taxes and some of the central business type stuff, but I was really running that show in terms of, again, hiring and, staffing and planning expansions. And so you started to learn with the benefit of having a little bit of a cushion, right, of some corporations underneath you. So I think it's not wise, I would say, for a new grad to come out and want to start their own practice, because your first years in the practice really have to be learning how to be a therapist, right? So and I can treat people and I'm not ever afraid of a diagnosis, or I don't have to do a lot of research when it comes to, I still do. There's things that come up that I don't know. And, I don't think I'm ever going to know everything in this profession. So, but I don't have to do as much of that as I did when I was, a first year therapist. But it is sometimes hard. So I treat 40 hours a week. And so this is where it comes into the work-life balance, because my business side oftentimes bleeds into my personal life, right? I'm doing it after hours. I might skip the gym and do it a lunchtime, meeting for a different commitment, or, the weekends I'm trying to do QuickBooks, or, whatever the case may be. I've learned to try to balance it. I'd love to get to a point where I'm doing 30 hours of clinical care, and maybe that extra 10 can really be focused on the business. I have an amazing office manager who takes over a lot of the things that I could do, but I have other things to do, right? But it is hard to balance it sometimes. I think a lot of administrators or practice directors are maybe treating 50-50 or, 70-30. And I think again, I said I opened this 8 years ago. I'm getting to the point now where things are really kind of pretty smooth and stable. So I can kind of pull back a little bit from the treatment side. If only I just didn't have an over full schedule with patients that wanted to see me. That's the other piece to it. So.
Do you remember the moment where you decided you were practicing PT person and then you decided to run your own show? Was there, what do you remember why you decided to do that? Was it like, hey, I think I can do this better, or what happened?
Well, I think I essentially was doing that when I was at ProLiance, and it was a phone call I had with a colleague of mine, and he was like, why would you keep working for somebody else? You're doing all the work, and you're getting, somebody else is getting paid for that, right? Why won't you just do that for yourself? And I'm like, okay. So, I've started looking into it, and what could this look like? And, and it's not easy when you're starting off, even when you're, as seasoned in an area as you are, like, but we grew every single year, and it just continued to do well. And I feel really proud of what we've accomplished here and kind of what we've built. Again, pre-COVID numbers are back, which feels amazing. But it's not easy. The business side is, again, there's so many nuances with insurance companies, staff, issues, salaries, that, the things that you have to manage and stay on top of, liability insurance, like all the taxes, there's so many things that you have to do that, once you start doing it more and more, you get into the routine of, what needs to be done monthly, what needs to be done quarterly, what needs to be done weekly, right? Processing payroll, something I do every single Wednesday, right? I just take a little time away and, everybody gets paid, but it seems like it's behind the scenes, right? But there's a lot of work on the business side that does have to be done. So,
yeah, I talk a lot with my guests about AI and how it's changing things. And in your profession, I would think you're safe. AI is never going to replace the human touch. But, it is interesting. Like, the question is, what can hurt your industry? And the pandemic, like when you actually physically can't come in and see people. So remotely, are you able to accomplish the same types of things via Zoom? I mean, or do you have to be there? I mean, I would think you have to be there physically touching the person.
We did some telehealth during COVID, of course. There were just times where people didn't want to come in. And, when you talk to those folks that did a lot of telehealth, like, how was it? And they're like, it was garbage, right? And it wasn't that the service was garbage, but it was our bread and butter, our manual therapy techniques, right? People come in not just to do exercises, but to have, their system change in some way, whether it's joint mobilization or some soft tissue work, or even just some simple cueing of an exercise, right? Super hard to evaluate somebody's range of motion restrictions when you're looking at a computer screen, right? And not everybody had a great setup to do that. I did one evaluation for a college kiddo, and, he's got his phone on the floor. I'm trying to look at his ankle mobility. I'm like, well, and then you only get a snapshot. You don't get to see what the rest of the system's doing while the ankle's moving, right? So it's very limiting, I think. It was great to have it as an option so we could continue patients' care that just simply couldn't come in. But I think that was a big restriction. And like you say, like, AI is not going to take away the human touch part of it, right? I think bigger threats to us are bigger corporations that get better insurance rates. And then they kind of just scarf up the small practice, right? Like, for me, when I have an insurance company contract come up, they just tell me what the new rates are. I don't have any negotiating power. If they say, well, if you don't like the rates that we're giving you, then we'll just drop you off the network. And I'm a small peanut compared to, if you're taking away Virginia Mason, let's say, they have a much bigger voice at that contracting table. So I think from a private practice standpoint, that's probably my biggest threat, and trying to stay independent and valuable.
So do you feel the industry or what you do is safe for a while? If someone's 25 thinking about getting it, maybe they're 27, they just came out of getting their master's. Is it a safe road to go down, or do you feel like there's a little bit of trouble?
I do think we'll always have job security, and the setting may change based on, reimbursements rates. But I think, people are still going to be active. People are still going to get hurt. People still need to have care, and that's not going to change. I mean, even just the population growth here in Issaquah, like, it's hard to find a primary care physician if you don't already have one, right? There's networks are bogging up with the number of people that are trying to use services. So I do think we have some value, and we'll always have that kind of job security. And again, just may look different in terms of, I'm hopeful the private practice can kind of swing back. It's usually a pendulum shift. We used to have a lot of like Health South used to be a big presence here in the Pacific Northwest, Physiotherapy Associates, some of the bigger nationwide companies. And that's kind of gone by the wayside for a while. Now we're kind of seeing some of that come back with some of these bigger companies taking over some of the smaller practices again.
Yeah. I am curious, and I think other people watching, what is your week like, or your month, or your day like, and maybe you can even comment on, it's probably different if you're just a practicing physical therapist versus what you are, is you run a business. So there's a lot of hats you wear. Yep. But what's it like? I mean, are you able to shut it off at 5 p.m. and go hang out with friends and family, or are you always on call?
I wouldn't say I'm always on call. I do, I've been to my, if patients have access to me after hours, it's because I've given them that access, and it's important and valuable for them to have a resource. So there are some people that might, shoot a text or an email after hours that I, may respond then, or maybe the next business day. We are a pretty regimented, scheduled profession. So I would say we're kind of one step below retail. So oftentimes our clinic's open from 7 to 6. So we get 7 a.m. patients. Sometimes I'll throw a 6 a.m. patient there if they can't find another time around their work schedule. And then we're here with our last patient until 5. So there's some long days to kind of get people before and after work. Not everybody has the luxury of taking time off for an hour in the middle of a day, right? So you get that kind of before work, after work kind of rush, certainly after school rush. During the school year, after 3:30, we get busy with the high school kids. And then, we were full midday with the people who are retired or maybe working from home. That was a big benefit to COVID, is that people could come anytime, right? But it is a rigid schedule. Like, so if I have patients from 7 to 6, like every 45 minutes, I've got somebody new who's asking for my time. And so I have to stay on track with that, try to get my paperwork done for that session, and then move on to the next person, right? So there are times where paperwork might bleed into personal time because you don't always have a chance to type and do your thing. But it's possible to work a complete day, but once you're done for the most part, unless you've got charts to do. But it isn't like we have any emergency call or that sort of thing. So that's kind of a nice way to kind of just compartmentalize the day.
So as the owner and the boss, do you have to be first in, first out, or can you come, if you have something going on, can you show up at noon?
I rarely do that. Although, if I have a meeting or something, I've served on board for a nonprofit. So there will be times where I might be on a board retreat, or, I have my board meeting in a time that conflicts with patient care. So, I have the flexibility to block myself off, and so do my staff. If somebody has, a dentist appointment, and, I have one staff member who works 4/10, so he has a full day off where he could do all that stuff, and it doesn't always land there. Another therapist who does 3 long days and 2 short days to kind of balance that out. And that's, I think, the nice thing about the profession is that even if you wanted to work 20 hours a week, you could find a way to make it work so that you're available for your patient load. And they wouldn't know that you're not here at 5 if they never need you at 5, right? You just would never get a patient on your schedule that needs a 5 o'clock appointment. So there's some flexibility to it. But I try to model what I'm asking my staff to do. Like, I'm in the front lines with them. I'm here at 7, just before 7 every day, right? And, and then my long days, I might leave early I have 2 shorter days that I do some administrative stuff from home, but I also might be here the whole day.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about your patients, and I'm curious about, you work with athletes, you work high school, you work with elderly, you work with all of the above. Is it normal to be a generalist? Or, like, I know Kathy, a mutual friend of ours, works, I think, with older people, right? And she'll travel to them. Is this something that typically people figure out along the way, and then they just kind of key on a certain demographic? Or is it smarter and safer to kind of be able to deal with all of the above?
Yeah, I think most people will tend to specialize and in specialty. So mine again is orthopedics, right? So I've seen as young as 4 and as old as 94. So anybody in that gamut that shows up orthopedically, we don't see a lot of 4-year-olds often. To be fair, they were favors because there's pediatric therapy as well, which tends to be more of there's definitely orthopedics within pediatrics, but there's also a lot of neurologic issues in pediatric care. And certainly with adults too, someone might specialize in, say, post-stroke rehab or spinal cord injury, or, wound care. There's a lot of different specialty arms amongst PT. So mine just happens to be one that encompasses a lot of age demographics.
Excuse me.
So kind of the same.
Yeah. Is that get figured out in school? Like, do people just gravitate, or is it post school, they start working and then they kind of just naturally, find what they like?
I think you'll see both. I think I went into PT school thinking I was going to come out doing spinal cord injury. And I just was so enamored with orthopedics and working in orthopedics when I was in school that I knew that's where I wanted to be. But I think, when you come out, you may not have that. We're exposed to a lot through our internships and clinical rotations, but you may not know what you have for a passion. So there are people who just end up traveling and going to different places and trying different things to see what really sticks and fits. So, and then there's other people just stay as a generalist and just fill in where they need to. But I think most of us specialize.
So what would you say, Reid, like at the end of the day, what is it that you love about what you do?
I think first and foremost, it's the impact I can make in somebody's life to better their quality, right? So, again, we talk about the logo, and there's a rough edge and a smooth edge. And our mindset is that you're never going to leave the same way that you came in. There's something that's going to happen here that we're going to make life a little bit better, or you're going to move a little bit better. You're going to have a little less pain, whatever it might be. And, when you have somebody come in that says, all I really want to do is hike and I can't hike. And that's where the emotion comes in, right? The loss of. And then you do things to create a different system that now all of a sudden they can hike again. And the joy that happens for that patient. Like I just had a patient reach out with a text saying, I just hiked Poo Poo Point. That was the first time she had hiked in I think 3 or 4 years, because she has this very long history of her body just starting to fight back on itself. And has gone through a lot of different surgeries to get to the point where now she can hike again. And just the joy in the message, like it was as if I was the one experiencing that, right? And you do get this attachment to people that just is, it's compassion, right? It's that passion for compassionate care to that patient to get back to doing what they do. And to be able to be a part of that, I think is just invaluable, right? And if you have a skill set or knowledge base that can help somebody do that, that's the joy for me.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it a little earlier. It's okay. So from afar, you're fixing a situation, and it might not be the best way to phrase it, but you're actually getting let into their life. And like the idea of somebody being able to do something that they love to do that they never thought they could do again, that's powerful.
Yep.
And so if you're watching, that's the type of industry that PT might give you a glimpse or I don't know what the word is, exposure into some, really changing people's lives. Absolutely. And that's pretty cool. As we wind down, if we could reverse and go back in time, and University of Puget Sound, you're coming out, I'm guessing 27, 26, 25 years old. I don't know, 28. Mm-hmm. Would you knowing what would you do anything different? Would you have gone right into private practice, or do you think the route you went is how you do it again?
I don't think I would change anything. In terms of my career in PT, I really feel like the progression that I experienced and learning from different organizations and different people and mentors, and a lot of that was invaluable to be able to get to the point where I am now. And I'm kind of a achievement success based person, and I knew that I wanted to. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try to be the best at that I can. And part of that is reputation, but part of that is just feeling that you've done everything that you can for a patient. When I was in PT school, I worked for a clinic down in Puyallup, and the owner of the clinic and my mentor at the time was like, oh, when I graduated from college, I was the best PT on the planet. And I thought, well, that's an ego, right? But what he qualified it with, and it's because I did everything I knew to do. He goes, do I know more today? Of course. But if I had a patient, I didn't do things that I knew I could do to get him better, that's a bad PT, right? So you just give all you have to your patients, right? And get to the point where you said, I did what I could, right? And sometimes you're successful and not everything can be fixed, right? But I don't think I'd go back and change how I got here, because I think every experience I had formed me to be exactly where I am today.
Okay. I love it. And I get that response a lot when I ask that question. One thing I wanted to ask earlier before I forget, and not to get specific with in terms of what Reid makes, but compensation, the lifestyle, the making money part of it, is that a stressful situation? I mean, can you scale that, or is it just like, in my business of helping people with residential mortgage loans, I don't do a loan, I don't get paid. In your world, is it how does that work?
Well, in terms of reimbursement, of course, from the insurance companies, and again, that's where it's changed. But as a staff therapist, I think our salaries are very competitive, and I think there's certainly more than what I made when I came out of school. Right? There's been an expansion of salaries commensurate with inflation and things. Right? Sure. But I think you make a pretty comfortable living. I think as a business owner, that's where, you always eat last, right? Like, paying everybody else first. I work hard to make sure everybody's got their paycheck at the end of the 2-week period. And then, what's left is what's left. And there are times where that can be stressful. And there's times where you feel like things are going really well, right? And, you kind of ride the waves and you kind of look ahead at if the volume tends to decrease, what do we need to do to go out and market ourselves, or hit the network that we know, maybe a little shy. If the surgeon sends us 5 patients a month and we're only getting 2, let's figure out why, right? So there are things you can do to control it, right? And as a business owner, it is what it is. I used to joke that I got a lot of PTO before, and now I just get TO.
Yeah.
Right. It's not paid, but yeah.
I hear you. Is there any kind of, I'm fascinated by the careers that have an annuity income where, you build a book of business, you get paid on it, like financial services, commercial insurance. I get paid per deal. So if I stop doing deals, I don't get paid. Is there any kind of annuity, and it's not about the money. It's about the compensation. Like, could you ever create a program? Like, do physical therapists ever create like on-demand content that gets licensed? Like, is there other ways to make a living as a PT other than just seeing patients?
Sure. I think we are seeing more of, social influencers that are PTs and putting, a lot of content on Instagram, I'm sure making a side hustle there. Right. So you can do that for sure. I think there are, different programs that have been written by PTs. The, platform that we use for documentation was started by a PT, which is now the, most commonly used in the country. And I'm sure she's doing quite well with that. Right. So there are other, niches. And I think, that's the next, I think, step is, where does AI fit? Yeah. Right. Where is it in documentation? Is it in exercise prescription? Is it in patient interactions? There's some space for some growth and probably some revenue to be made in development for that.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, introvert, extrovert, like maybe somebody that's fascinated with the body and what you do, but maybe they're just shy and they don't really enjoy working with people, and they get, it's something they avoid. I'm just wondering if the different types of personalities could find a life in the world of physical therapy, if they're not really good, like one-on-one with people.
Yeah. There's always research, right? There's, you can be in the research lab doing some work with movement, biomechanical research. I think, another kind of offshoot, biomechanical engineering would have been a thing to think about too, in terms of PT versus PT for me, but kind of developing new things for the body to be used, whether it's surgical or, again, equipment, adaptive equipment. There's, I think, so many different ways for technology and development to be in the PT world, and not just treatment, right? Treatment is one pillar for sure.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know if this is maybe a bit of a stretch, but years ago, a friend of mine who had Down, I worked with him at my high school, and his dad owned a company where they did ski equipment for people who couldn't walk. And so I'm kind of thinking in my mind, it's like, okay, you're trying, when I listening to you, Reid, I'm thinking, okay, it's just way more than just helping somebody with a sore muscle or whatever. You're changing their life. You're getting them back to where they were. And like, it's much more than the body, right? It's the soul and it's the happiness. And what he did is, he was able to create a ski that allowed people to go back on the slopes, and they probably never thought they could ski again. Right. And so it seems like there's a lot of angles or directions you could go in.
Absolutely. That adaptive equipment is so critical. And because like I said, not everything is fixable. Somebody may come out with, a real functional deficit, and we've got to figure out a way to do things differently so that they can continue to function the way that they want to, right?
Yeah.
There's so many great examples about people that just exceed expectations with maybe adaptive piece of equipment or not, maybe just the way that they choose to use their system, right?
Yeah,
So
I agree.
That out.
So if PT was off the board, you couldn't do it, you lost your license. I'm kidding, but just something. Is there a dream job? And I ask this question of all my guests. Is there something that you would love to do if, you won the lotto and money wasn't an issue? Like, what's Reid's dream job?
Well, one of two things. I think, orthopedic surgery has always fascinated me in terms of the step before people get to me, right? I think that would take a lot of work to go back to do that. But I do think developing, again, the biomechanical engineering has always really spoke to me as well, as far as looking at the way the system works, figuring out how to do things differently, and then just bettering the equipment that we have available to people that need that adaptive equipment, right? And again, it's not even just like braces or supports or skis, but it's, we used to treat ACL patients where they couldn't move their knee for 6 weeks because the fixation techniques of that new ligament, that graft that they put in there was terrible. And then somebody came up with this great little screw that allowed us to start moving that knee at day one, which completely changed the rehab protocol, right? They didn't come out stiff. They didn't hate their therapist because at 6 weeks, they're stiff and they don't like people moving them around, right? So the fact that they just did a different screw for a fixation technique of a graft that could completely change that patient's experience, I think is incredible, right?
That's amazing. So are you referring to like patella, hamstring, or cadaver, and then now the screw is what changed everything?
The hamstring screw, yeah, that really kind of changed, because they would kind of put the ligament in there and just hope for the best, and the bone would kind of heal around it, right? Well, so you didn't want to bend the knee to stretch that graft out, and now it's fixated from day one. We can start bending. In fact, we normally see people on the second day after surgery. So,
wow,
yeah,
that is cool. Anything? We're gonna wind this down. You know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to get in behind the curtains to really understand the life of your life, your career. Is there anything I didn't ask or anything you want to mention to the audience before we say goodbye?
I think, anybody who's looking at this profession as an option, I think you've got to have good people skills. You've got to have good communication skills. I think you've got to have the good ability to network yourself in a way that, you're out there marketing, whether it's your work talking for you or you're out there knocking on doors, right, to build up that business. Again, that's if you're kind of in that private practice and want to build your own. But there are many ways to kind of get into the profession and learn all of that, right? It does not a skill set you have to have from the very beginning. You have to have those people skills, right? That's imperative. Like, you can't get somebody to trust you if you're not somebody who's trustworthy, right? So you've got to be able to communicate. You have to be able to have empathy. You've got to be able to say, this is this person's first time coming in. I may have treated 6 of these before them, but this is their first experience, and separate yourself to just be able to show up individually for them.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing how consistent the whole people skills thing comes up with. Like, even I had a guest who writes music film scores for movies. And I thought this person could be an introvert, but he talked about how the people skills, and it's interesting because I understand in your world how that would be important, but I think there's probably a lot of people that think, I'm good with the body. I don't really need to relate to people, but there are options out there, other people can go to. So I think it's the people, that's what's sticky. That's what keeps people coming back to Reid, in my opinion. So, hey, Reid, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And I know everybody who's interested in this profession would benefit. Is there, if people are interested coming out of school, as far as your company, I mean, what's the process as far as recruiting? They find you online?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Certainly we have a nice web presence. So anybody just reach out. I mean, you never know. I think that's, people look on Indeed for people that are hiring, but sometimes you might just get a resume that says, this one's too good to pass up. And somebody might be on the path of just thinking about hiring, right? We're on that kind of cusp right now that we're probably ready to hire that next therapist. And, if someone were to walk into my email inbox and I'm thinking about that at the right time, I think that's, sometimes you just trust that.
Yeah. Timing.
Right.
Timing. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks, Dirk. This is great.
All right. Take care.
You too.